Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Overthinker's Guide to Love. It's Elena, and I am so happy you're here for episode 3. And I want to start today's episode with a question. Have you ever had someone disappear from your life without ever saying goodbye? Maybe it started like a how like modern relationships do. You matched on a dating app, a friend introduced you, you met at a bar, maybe they followed you on Instagram. At first it was exciting. You look forward to hearing from them. Every notification made you smile. You started sharing little parts of your day. They became part of your routine without you even realizing it. Then one day, the conversations got shorter, the replies took longer, the energy felt different. You tried not to think too much about it. You told yourself they were probably busy, life gets hectic, people have jobs, family, responsibilities. Then another day passed, and another. And then eventually you found yourself staring at your phone, wondering if you should send another text. You start asking yourself questions that never crossed your mind before. Did I say something wrong? Was I too interested? Did I scare them away? Are they talking to someone else? And maybe the hardest question of all, was any of it real? If you've ever been ghosted, you know exactly what I'm talking about. What's interesting is that when people talk about ghosting, they usually focus on one question: why do people ghost? And that's an important question, obviously, but I don't think it's the most important one. I think the bigger question is, why can one person's silence completely change the way we think about ourselves? Because ghosting isn't just about disappearing, it's about what happens inside of us after they do. Today, I want to talk about both sides of ghosting: the psychology of the person who leaves and the psychology of the person who left behind, and what ghosting reveals about fear, communication, emotional maturity, and the very human need to understand why. Because I don't think ghosting is a dating trend. I think it's one of the clearest windows into human psychology. Why ghosting feels different. Let me ask you something. Would you rather hear something painful or hear nothing at all? At first, that seems like an easy question. Most of us would probably choose silence. After all, no bad news sounds better than bad news. But psychologically, that's usually not true. Imagine someone looked you in the eyes and said, I think you're an amazing person, but I don't feel the connection I'm looking for. Would that hurt? Obviously. You'll probably cry. You'll probably replay the conversation for a while. But eventually, your mind would begin accepting reality. Now, imagine instead they just disappear. No explanation, no goodbye, no, this isn't working, nothing. Now your brain has a completely different job. Instead of healing, it starts searching, searching for clues, searching for answers, searching for a reason. And here's something fascinating: our brains are incredibly uncomfortable with uncertainty, which we know from all the other episodes if you've listened. In psychology, there's a concept called the need for cognitive closure. It describes our natural desire to have answers, make sense of things, and resolve uncertainty. When something important is left unfinished, our minds don't like leaving it there. They keep trying to solve it. That's exactly what ghosting creates: an unfinished story. And human beings don't like unfinished stories. Imagine reading your favorite book. You've completely invested. You've fallen in love with the characters. You're finally about to find out how everything ends. And then someone rips out the last chapter. You probably spend days wondering what happened. Not because you enjoyed wondering, because your brain wants completion. Ghosting is like someone ripping the last chapter out of a relationship. You never get to see how the story ends, so your brain does something incredible. It tries to write the ending itself. Here's where things become really interesting. When information is missing, our brains don't usually leave the page blank, they fill it in. The problem is they don't always fill it in accurately. Think about the thoughts people have after being ghosted. I wasn't enough. I came on too strong. They found someone prettier. Nobody ever stays. What's interesting about these thoughts is that they're not facts, they're stories. Stories created by a brain that's desperately trying to explain something it doesn't understand. And here's the part I think we don't talk about enough. Our brains aren't trying to hurt us when they do this. They're trying to protect us because, from our brain's perspective, having a painful explanation feels safer than having no explanation at all. Think about that for a second. Sometimes we'd rather believe something terrible about ourselves than live with uncertainty. That's how uncomfortable uncertainty is for the human mind. And maybe that's why ghosting hurts so much. Not because silence is louder than words, but because silence gives our insecurities permission to speak. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about ghosting is that people believe they're upset because they didn't get a text back. But if we're honest, it's never just about the text, it's about what the text represented: hope, possibility, connection, maybe even the future you were quietly starting to imagine. You weren't just waiting for a notification, you were waiting for reassurance, for certainty, for proof that this thing you were beginning to care about was real. And when that reassurance never comes, it can feel like the foundation underneath you suddenly disappeared. Not because you were in love, not because you were naive, but because human beings are wired for connection. From the moment we're born, our brains begin learning whether the people we depend on will respond when we reach for them. So when someone suddenly disappears without expectation, it doesn't just disappoint us. For many people, it activates something much older, something much deeper. It awakens the fear that maybe connection isn't as safe or secure as we hoped it was. And that's why ghosting often hurts far beyond the relationship itself. It's really just about losing one person. Sometimes it's about losing our sense of certainty. So, why do people ghost? It's probably the question everyone wants answered. And if I'm being honest, I don't think there's one answer I can give you right now. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make is believing every person who ghosts is the same, that they're all selfish or heartless or manipulative. Some certainly are, 100%. But psychology teaches us something really important, that the same behavior can come from completely different motives. Think about this. Two people can both ghost someone. One disappears because they genuinely don't care at all. The other disappears because they care so much about avoiding conflict that they can't bring themselves to have the conversation. The behavior looks identical, but the psychology behind it couldn't be more different. That's why I think understanding ghosting is so interesting, because it isn't really about texting. It's about how people deal with uncomfortable emotions. We're all trying to avoid something. Here's something I don't think we talk about enough. As human beings, we're constantly making decisions based on one question. What will make me feel better right now? Sometimes that's healthy, sometimes it isn't. Imagine you're about to have a difficult conversation. You know you need to tell someone your feelings have changed. Your stomach tightens, your heart starts racing. You know they're probably going to be hurt. Maybe they'll cry. Maybe they'll ask questions you don't know how to answer. Maybe they're Maybe they'll think you're a bad person. Now imagine you have another option. You can simply not respond. For a moment, that feels easier. The anxiety goes away, the uncomfortable conversation disappears, at least temporarily. Psychologists call this negative reinforcement. When avoiding something uncomfortable gives us relief, our brain learns that worked. The problem is, just because something reduces your anxiety doesn't mean it's the healthiest thing to do. Ghosting often reduces one person's discomfort by creating someone else's. Ghosting is often about emotional avoidance. I think ghosting tells us something much bigger than rather someone liked us. I think it tells us how they respond to discomfort. One of the hardest parts of being human is realizing that relationships eventually require uncomfortable conversations. At some point, you have to tell someone you've changed your mind, or that your feelings have shifted, or that you're scared, or that you're not ready. Emotionally mature people don't enjoy those conversations at all. Nobody does. They just understand that honesty is part of respecting another person. Ghosting is often what happens when someone isn't able or isn't willing to tolerate that discomfort. Think about that. Not willing to tolerate discomfort, because that's really what we're talking about. Not texting someone back isn't the issue. Avoiding difficult emotion is. I want to say something that might surprise some of you. I think good people sometimes ghost. Not because ghosting is good, but because good people are still imperfect people. Maybe you've done it yourself, not because you wanted to hurt someone, but because you didn't know what to say. Maybe you kept thinking, I'll text him tomorrow. Then tomorrow became next week. And then after enough time passed, you felt embarrassed. Now it felt awkward to explain, so you waited even longer. And the longer you waited, the harder it became to reach out. Have you ever noticed that? Anyone? Because sometimes avoiding a problem actually makes it bigger. This happens in so many areas of our life. We put off making doctor's appointments, we avoid apologizing, we delay difficult conversations, not because we're bad people, because avoidance gives us temporary relief. The problem is, temporary relief often creates long term pain. I think ghosting reveals something really important, not whether someone cared, but how they handled difficult emotions. Think about the people you admire most. Maybe it's a parent, a mentor, a friend, someone you respect. Chances are, what makes them emotionally mature isn't that they never have hard conversations, it's that they're willing to have them. They don't disappear when things become uncomfortable. They stay, they communicate, they own their decision, they take courage. That takes courage. And I think we underestimate how much courage healthy relationships actually require. It's easy to show up when everything's exciting. It's much harder to show up when you know your honesty might disappoint someone. But that's exactly what healthy communication looks like. Not perfection, just the willingness to stay in the conversation. When I was researching this topic, I began to realize I was asking the wrong questions. Instead of asking, why did they ghost me? I started looking for what emotions they were trying to avoid when people are ghosting, because every behavior serves a purpose, even unhealthy ones. Maybe they were avoiding guilt, of maybe conflict, maybe vulnerability, maybe accountability. Maybe they didn't have the emotional skills to end something with honesty. I'll probably never know, and that's okay, Because understanding the purpose behind a behavior doesn't mean accepting the behavior. It simply helps us stop turning someone else's choices into a statement about our worth. Maybe ghosting isn't evidence that you were too much. Maybe it's evidence that they didn't yet have the emotional courage to do something hard. And those are two very different conclusions. I want to ask another question now. Have you ever noticed that after someone ghosts you, you almost become a different person? You start checking your phone more, you notice when they're online, you read conversations you haven't looked at in weeks. You suddenly remember tiny details that didn't seem important before. Maybe they took 6 hours to reply one Tuesday. Maybe they canceled plans once. Maybe they used a different emoji. Suddenly, your brain treats every little moment like it contains the answer you've been searching for. Why? Because your brain is trying to solve a problem. Here's something that I find fascinating: our brains are prediction machines. Every single day, they're trying to make sense of the world around us. They ask questions like, can I trust this person? What happens next? Am I safe here? When someone becomes part of your daily life, your brain starts recognizing patterns. You expect the good morning text, you expect the FaceTime call, you expect them to laugh at your jokes. Those patterns become part of your normal. Then one day, the pattern disappears. Your brain immediately notices. It doesn't like broken patterns because broken patterns create uncertainty, and uncertainty feels threatening. Not necessarily because you're in danger, but because your brain doesn't know what comes next. Have you ever caught yourself replaying the same conversations over and over? Maybe it happened weeks ago, maybe months ago, but somehow you can remember exactly what they said, exactly what you said, exactly what restaurant you were sitting in. You start wondering, maybe they were trying to tell me they were losing interest. Maybe I missed something. Maybe if I had done this differently. Here's what's interesting: you're not replaying those memories because you're obsessed. You're replaying them because your brain believes the answer is hiding somewhere inside of them. If it can just find one clue, maybe everything will finally make sense. But memory doesn't actually work like a security camera. We like to think we replay memories exactly as they happen. We don't. Every time we remember something, our brain reconstructs it. And when we're anxious, that reconstruction often becomes more negative. That's why, after being ghosted, moments that once felt perfectly normal suddenly feel suspicious. Your brain isn't lying to you, it's trying to protect you. The problem is, protection and accuracy aren't always the same thing. I think this is one of the saddest things ghosting does to us. It quietly turns us into prosecutors in our own trial. We start collecting evidence against ourselves. I was too available. I shouldn't have double texted. Maybe I care too much. Maybe I wasn't attractive enough. Maybe I'm just not enough. Have you noticed something? Almost every explanation points back to you. It's amazing how quickly we assume responsibility for someone else's behavior. But why? Because believing it's our fault gives us something that uncertainty doesn't: control. Think about it. If the reason they ghosted you, they ghosted, is because you did something wrong, then maybe next time you can fix it. And then the next person won't ghost you. Maybe next time you'll know exactly what to say. Maybe next time you won't make the same mistake. Oddly enough, our brains often prefer self blame over uncertainty because self blame creates the illusion that we have control. But here's the truth: sometimes there's there was nothing you could have done differently. Sometimes the outcome had far more to do with where they were emotionally than anything you did. Ghosting doesn't just make us question the relationship, it makes us question ourselves. You stop wondering, why did they leave? And start wondering, am I difficult to love? Those are completely different questions. One is about their behavior, and the other is about your identity. And that's where ghosting becomes very dangerous because an unanswered text slowly becomes an unanswered question about your worth. I don't think people realize how often we confuse someone's behavior with our value. Someone leaves and suddenly we believe we're unlovable. Someone loses interest and suddenly we believe we're always be abandoned. But another person's behavior can never define your worth. It can hurt you, it can disappoint you, it can change you, but it cannot tell you who you are. Only you get to decide that. Ghosting changes the way we see future relationships. One experience can quietly shape the next. Maybe someone ghosts you after you finally started opening up. Now, when someone new comes along, you hesitate, you overanalyze, you wait longer to text back because you don't want to seem too interested. You convince yourself not to get your hopes up, not because you're playing games, because you're protecting yourself. That's what our brains do. They learn from painful experiences. The problem is, sometimes they become too good at protecting us. We build walls that were meant to be temporary, but eventually those walls keep out the people we actually wanted to let in. More I've been thinking about ghosting, the more I've realized something. Most of us aren't actually searching for the person. We're searching for certainty. We think, if they would just explain themselves, if they would just answer one question, if I just knew why, then I'll finally be able to move on. But would you? Would you really be able to move on? Or would your brain immediately find another question to ask them? Maybe that's why closure is so complicated. Sometimes what we think we're looking for isn't really an explanation. It's relief. And those two things aren't the same. So, where do we go from here? Because understanding the psychology behind ghosting is one thing, living through it is another. I think one of the hardest truths that we have to accept is that not every chapter of our lives gets an explanation. As human beings, we love certainty. We want things to make sense. We want to know why someone changed, why they left, why they stopped trying, why they chose silence. Because we believe that if we just had the answer, we could finally move on. But what if healing doesn't begin when we finally understand them? What if healing begins when we stop believing we need to? Think about how much time we spend trying to solve people, trying to decode their actions, trying to understand their motives, trying to figure out what they were thinking. Sometimes we become so focused on understanding the person who left that we stop paying attention to the person who stayed, ourselves. Maybe the better question isn't, why did they ghost me? Maybe it's, what have I been believing about myself ever since they did? Because that's where the real work begins. Not in understanding them, but in noticing the story you've been telling yourself. Maybe you've been telling yourself that you're too much. Maybe you've convinced yourself you're not interesting enough, not attractive enough, not lovable enough. Maybe you start expecting everyone to leave because one person did. Those stories feel true, but feelings are not always facts. Your brain is trying to protect you. It wants to make sure you never experience type of that kind of pain again. So it starts creating rules. Don't get attached too easily. Don't show too much interest. Don't be vulnerable. Don't trust people. At first, those real rules feel safe, but eventually they become prisons because the same walls that you pan out, they that keep pain out, they also keep love out. And I think that's one of the greatest risks of ghosting. Not that someone disappeared, but that we begin disappearing from ourselves. We stop saying what we feel. We stop getting excited. We stop believing people when they tell us they care. We become smaller, quieter, more guarded, not because that's who we are, because we've been hurt. But healing isn't pretending the hurt never happened. Healing is deciding that someone's else inability to communicate will not determine the way you love for the rest of your life. I also want to say something to anyone listening who has ghosted someone before. Maybe you're realizing that as you've listened to this episode, if that's you, I hope this doesn't leave you feeling ashamed. I hope it leaves you feeling curious. Ask yourself, why was disappearing easier than being honest? What emotion were you protecting yourself from? Because if we never understand our own patterns, we'll likely repeat them. And that's the beautiful thing about psychology. Its purpose isn't to judge us, it's to help us understand ourselves well enough to grow. So, whether you've been ghosted or you've ghosted someone, I hope this episode reminds you that growth starts with awareness, not perfection, just awareness. Before we end, I want to leave you with one final thought. I don't think ghosting is the opposite of love. I think ghosting is often the opposite of emotional courage. Love asks us to be honest, to be vulnerable, to have conversations we rather avoid, to tell someone the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Because respect isn't measured by how we treat people when everything is easy. It's measured by how we treat people when things become difficult. And maybe that's the biggest lesson ghosting has to teach us. Not that person that people always leave, but that the right people won't make you guess where you stand. They won't communicate perfectly. No one does. But they'll communicate. They'll stay in the conversation. They'll choose honesty over avoidance. And that's the kind of relationships everyone deserves. Every one of us deserves. So if you're listening today because someone disappeared from your life, I want you to remember this. Their silence may have left you with questions, but it does not get to write the story of your worth. One person's inability to communicate does not mean you're difficult to love. One person's fear of uncomfortable conversations does not make you unworthy of honesty. One person's choice to leave without an explanation does not mean you'll spend the rest of your life searching for people who do the same. Your story didn't end when they stopped responding. It simply became a chapter you didn't choose. And like every chapter, it has something to teach you. Maybe it taught you that consistency matters. Maybe it taught you that communication is attractive. Maybe it taught you that peace is more valuable than potential. Or maybe it taught you that you deserve someone who never leaves you wondering if they care. Whatever it taught you, don't let the lesson become the lens through which you see everyone else. Keep your heart open. Keep your standards high and never confuse someone's inability to show up with your ability to be loved. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with me. I know this episode was longer than my last, but thank you. If this episode made you feel a little more understood, I'd love for you to share it with someone who might need to hear it too. And if there's a topic you've been wanting me to cover, send me a message on Instagram at the Overthinker's Guide to Love, and I'll genuinely love to hear from you. Until next time, be curious about your mind and gentle with your heart. Bye, guys.